What was hidden behind that small note, tucked inside a receipt, powerful enough to make a business owner turn his entire empire upside down? Malcolm Graves stepped into Fort Baxter Steakhouse on a scorching Wednesday afternoon. No one turned their head. And why would they? With a faded baseball cap pulled low over his face, a dust-covered leather jacket, and worn down shoes with cracked heels, he looked just like any trucker grabbing a quick meal before hitting the road again. But Fort Baxter was no random stop. It was one of the original locations of Graves and Oak, the steakhouse chain Malcolm had built with his own hands and square foot by square foot. 17 restaurants spread across 5 states, once a source of pride, now in visible decline. The headquarters sent in reports, HR blamed the market, managers pointed to staffing shortages. But Malcolm wasn't looking for excuses. He was after the truth. And no truth ever lived inside an Excel spreadsheet. Malcolm asked for a window seat, one that gave him a clear view of the kitchen door, and where he wouldn't draw much attention. The hostess nodded without looking up. He didn't give his name, just said quietly, 1. Anywhere quiet is fine. Though a few tables were occupied, the air remained heavy and still. Staff moved cautiously, like every step had to be measured. Malcolm ordered a ribeye, the very cut he'd personally chosen for the first menu, alongside mashed potatoes and grilled greens. The waitress approached, a young woman with dark circles under her eyes and a voice made hoarse by exhaustion, repeating his order without glancing at the menu. No greeting, no smile, just a task executed. When the meal ended, Malcolm sipped the last of his coffee in silence. The girl returned, laid the check on the table neatly folded, and walked off as if she'd never been there. But in that instant, everything changed direction. Inside the bill, there was more than just a number. A small piece of paper, folded in half, handwritten in tilted blue ink. If it's really you, don't leave. Malcolm sat frozen. No reaction. No blink. But inside, everything began to shift. He had come seeking the truth. And now he knew someone was waiting for him to uncover far more than that. Malcolm kept his eyes fixed on the kitchen door. But in the reflection of the window beside him, he saw her, the young waitress with her hair tied neatly and sleeves rolled high, glancing his way. Not directly, but just enough for him to know the note hadn't arrived by chance. He didn't blink, didn't look down, only kept his hand resting on the coffee cup and the folded slip now tucked into his jacket pocket. That familiar instinct stirred within him, the kind honed through decades of negotiations, hundreds of moments spent reading body language, and thousands of decisions made in a split second. There was something about this girl, not fear, but a quiet plea for help. Malcolm was not a man easily swayed, but he could recognize an honest look when he saw one. Across the restaurant, a large man with a buzz-cut, tight-fitting polo shirt and the posture of authority stood near the bar. Arms folded, eyes scanning the room with scrutiny. He didn't look like a customer. He looked like someone in control, a manager, without question. And not the usual kind. Malcolm dropped his gaze to his plate, pretending to take another bite. But every sense in him was now alert. This restaurant wasn't just struggling with service. There was something deeper, something far more rotten. He looked around. The staff moved silently, communication kept to a bare minimum, and smiles were rare, as if someone had stolen them. The customers, too, sat distracted, like people dining in a place they had no intention of returning to. Malcolm knew when the air inside a restaurant turned heavy, it was never about the food. It was about how people were treated behind the scenes. And most telling of all, no one dared to speak up, except that girl. Malcolm took the last sip of coffee and stood. But instead of heading for the front door, he turned and walked straight toward the narrow hallway that led to the employee area. Each step echoed against the old tile floor, like a quiet declaration. He had accepted the invitation without saying a single word, and he was ready to confront whatever was hiding behind that glass. Malcolm walked slowly down the hallway, leading to the staff area, not hurried, not looking down, just enough to seem like a lost customer heading the wrong way. A smooth voice called out behind him, "Sir, the restroom is the other way." Malcolm stopped and turned halfway. The buzz-cut man, just as he suspected, stood blocking the entrance, his eyes cold, but his voice still sweet like the syrup they served at the counter. "I'm Evan Wolfe, the manager here. Is there a problem?" Malcolm looked him straight in the eye, his tone steady. "I need to speak to my server. Just for a moment." Evan narrowed his gaze, folding his arms across his chest as if to mask his growing suspicion. "If you have a complaint, you can take it up with me. Guests aren't allowed to pull staff off the floor." But Malcolm didn't back down. "Then I'm afraid you'll need to get used to a different way of doing things," he replied softly, his gaze unwavering. Evan froze for a few seconds, clearly weighing whether this man in front of him was more than he seemed. Then he tilted his chin slightly, reluctantly stepping aside. "She's probably cleaning up in the back." Malcolm said nothing more. He walked past, heading into the narrow corridor that led to the storage area. There, under dim lights and the sharp scent of disinfectant, he found Talia carrying a crate of lemons. Her eyes met his, startled, not out of fear of being caught, but concern for his safety. "What are you doing here?" she whispered. Malcolm opened his hand, revealing the folded note. "I read it. Now tell me everything." Talia glanced around, then pulled him toward the far end of the hallway, opening the door to a small storage room. No cameras, no prying eyes. The space barely fit 2 people standing. She closed the door, hesitated for a beat, then exhaled. "I don't even know where to start. I just know something's very wrong here." In the cramped space, surrounded by the smell of old fryer oil and sanitizing spray, the truth began to peel away layer by layer. And Malcolm understood. What he was about to hear wouldn't just change this restaurant. It would shake the foundation of an entire system he once believed he knew. Talia leaned gently against the storage room door, her voice low and guarded, as if the very walls might be listening. "Evan isn't just unpleasant. He's dangerous. Orders go missing, liquor inventory doesn't match, cash disappears from the register, but only on nights he's in charge. He deletes staff hours from the system and files fake reports, forcing us to work extra shifts without pay. Anyone who speaks up, their schedule disappears overnight." She paused, her eyes narrowing with wary caution. One server saw him pocketing cash behind the bar. 2 days later, her name vanished from the roster. Malcolm said nothing. No notes, no interruptions. He listened with the steady gaze of someone who had seen cracks in systems that were supposed to be airtight. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. Talia let out a tired smile, the kind worn by someone who had hoped too many times. 6 years ago, I worked at the Bentonville branch. Opening day, you showed up. A customer started choking. I got to him before the manager did. You gave me $100 and said I had initiative. You probably don't remember. Malcolm closed his eyes for a moment. I remember. He was eating grilled venison. You were calmer than the paramedic. Talia straightened her shoulders, trying to mask the emotion that surfaced. I didn't think you'd come back. Not like this. Malcolm nodded slowly. I needed to see it for myself. She turned her face away, but her voice remained steady. Then you'll need to leave through the side door. Evan installed a camera at the main exit. She handed him a rolled-up napkin. Inside was a silver key gleaming faintly. His locker key. You'll find what you need there. Malcolm clenched the key in his hand. Will you be all right? The answer came softly, almost like a breath. I've lasted this long. I can hang on a little more. As he stepped out the side door, the late afternoon sun stretched long across the parking lot behind the restaurant. In his pocket, the key felt heavier than metal alone. It carried trust, courage, and a truth waiting to be unearthed from years of buried dust. The next morning, Malcolm returned to the restaurant right at the lunch rush, still wearing the same worn clothes from the day before. No hat, no sunglasses, yet no one recognized him. The young host kept his eyes glued to a cracked iPad screen and gave a distracted nod when he saw Malcolm walk in. You again? What is this, every week now? Malcolm offered a faint smile, made his way to table 7, his usual seat, and began to observe. The restaurant felt busier, but the undercurrent of quiet tension remained. Talia passed by and briefly caught his eye. No words, just a small nod, enough to confirm that everything was proceeding according to plan. At the right moment, Malcolm rose from his seat and quietly made his way to the side corridor, where the back door had been propped open with a mop. He slipped into the hallway behind the kitchen, careful to avoid being seen. The staff locker room appeared ahead, damp, lit by a flickering fluorescent bulb. He found the locker marked EW. The silver key turned smoothly, clicking open with an unexpectedly soft sound. Inside was a black fabric bag. Malcolm opened it. Gym clothes, a cheap bottle of cologne, and just as Talia had said, a burner phone with no case and no screen lock. He powered it on and scrolled through. Messages coded with strange initials, hurriedly snapped photos of receipts, and a call log filled with unlisted numbers. In a smaller compartment, a roll of cash bound with a rubber band, all in small denominations, none accounted for. Clear signs of embezzlement. Malcolm took photos of everything with his own phone, then replaced each item exactly as he had found it. But he didn't stop there. He moved into the adjacent manager's office. In the second drawer, he found a small leather notebook, Langley's daily book, filled with handwritten financial entries. Each page was a puzzle piece, mismatched liquor inventory, rounded down tips, shifts erased and rewritten. Malcolm was flipping through when the door behind him swung open. Evan Wolfe stood there, arms crossed, eyes dark with fury. Thought you were smart, huh? The silent war had officially begun. Malcolm stood up straight, the notebook loosely held in his hand, his eyes locked on Evan. No explanation, no retreat. Evan slammed the door shut behind him, fists clenched, voice grinding through his teeth. "You think you can sneak into my office, dig through my things, and just walk out like nothing happened?" Malcolm didn't flinch. "I'm not walking out as a customer, Evan," he said slowly. "I'm the name on the lease, the man who built this place from the ground up, and you're stealing from me, from the very people who keep this place running." Evan let out a dry laugh, brittle and ready to crack. "You got proof? Just the word of some sleepy server? A few scribbles in a notebook?" Malcolm raised the leather journal to chest level. "I've got documents. I've got photos. I've got chat logs from the burner phone in your locker. You forgot to wipe it." Evan stepped forward, but Malcolm didn't move. The air in the room thickened, like two predators sizing each other up. "Call security," Malcolm said quietly. "Or the police. Let them decide who's holding black and white proof." Evan was silent for a few seconds, then suddenly relaxed his shoulders, his mouth curling into a cold smirk. "You think it's just me? You think you've uncovered the whole thing because some tired waitress slipped you a note and you found a journal?" Malcolm narrowed his eyes. "Marcus Vell." Evan nodded, not denying it. "He allowed it. He understands the system needs to be flexible. You don't survive in this world without bending the rules." Malcolm stepped past him, notebook still in hand. "You're wrong. I survive by making sure this world doesn't rot from the inside out. And today, that cleanup starts here." He pushed the door open, never looking back. Evan didn't stop him. There were no more threats. Because in that moment, he understood. This man hadn't returned just to investigate. He returned to cleanse. And the notebook in Malcolm's hand was the beginning of the end for a corrupt empire, of which Evan was merely the bottom rung. When Malcolm left the restaurant, the sunlight had turned a brilliant gold, stretching across the quiet street. He returned to a small motel a few blocks away, where flickering fluorescent lights and the lingering smell of bleach were no longer unfamiliar. Sitting at a chipped wooden table, he flipped through each photo taken from the burner phone, each worn page of Langley's notebook, his eyes steady and unwavering. He wasn't angry. He was preparing. At 9 a.m. the next morning, his phone vibrated. A local number appeared on the screen. Without hearing the voice, Malcolm already knew. "Dan, it's me, Marcus Vell." Marcus's voice still carried its usual sweetness, but there was a scratch beneath it that only a long-time partner could recognize. Malcolm said nothing. He let the silence stretch, forcing Marcus to go on. "I heard you've been looking into Fort Baxter. This didn't need to go this far." Malcolm leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed out the window. "You should have called sooner." Marcus exhaled softly, trying to maintain his usual rhythm. "We both know Evan's a little rough around the edges, but he's been keeping the numbers stable while other branches are falling apart. I didn't know everything." "Don't lie, Marcus," Malcolm interrupted, his voice calm but sharper than a scalpel. "You hired Evan to do what you didn't have the guts to do yourself. And me, I didn't build this chain to squeeze unpaid hours out of high school kids working part-time." Silence followed. Then Marcus's tone hardened. "If you take this public, it'll burn the brand. Investors will panic. The board will turn. You'll lose everything, too." Malcolm nodded slowly, as if weighing the cost. "Then maybe you should have thought about that, before betraying the very principles we swore to uphold." The call ended without a goodbye. Only the ticking of the wall clock remained, and in Malcolm's hands, the undeniable proof. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need an emergency boardroom. He only needed one ally who knew how to tell a story. And the next morning, Malcolm stepped into a small cafe, sitting across from a local journalist, one with a sharp pen who had once brought down a real estate empire with a single article. The storm was about to be unleashed, and it wouldn't leave anyone untouched. In the old cafe where sunlight filtered through dusty glass, Malcolm sat across from Ken Holland, a veteran reporter from the Arkansas Chronicle. The man wore a wrinkled shirt, his old laptop covered in journalism stickers, but his gaze was sharp as a blade. Malcolm handed Ken a thin folder containing a copy of Langley's ledger, screenshots from the phone, tampered shift schedules, and a simple audio recording of Talia's testimony. Ken didn't ask many questions. He just nodded, then turned to Talia, who sat beside Malcolm, her hands trembling slightly as she recounted everything. She spoke of Evan, of the missing hours, the mocking laughter behind her back, the days when the entire restaurant became a silent trap, where anyone who spoke up became the next to disappear. But she also spoke of one unusual day when a scruffy old man ordered a ribeye steak, and no one realized he was the founder of the brand. Ken nodded thoughtfully, typing faster when she mentioned the handwritten note tucked inside the receipt. 2 hours later, he closed the laptop and looked up. "This story is going to spread," he said. And he was right. 3 days later, the article titled "Undercover Owner Exposes Corrupt Manager at His Own Restaurant" swept across social media. It didn't stop at Fort Baxter. Employees from Little Rock, Tulsa, Baton Rouge began sending letters. Some apologized for their silence. Others shared old evidence. Many described other managers who used the same tactics to steal, bully, and deceive. Malcolm didn't ignore a single message. He read every word, replied to every one. Not out of obligation, but because he understood years of silence had allowed people like Evan and Marcus to thrive. The following Monday morning, when Talia walked into the HR office at Fort Baxter, she saw an envelope on the desk. Inside was a formal offer. The position of general manager, with a livable wage, full benefits, and a signature from Malcolm himself. She read it 3 times before daring to believe it. When she looked up, Malcolm was standing at the doorway. "Are you serious?" she asked. He nodded. "You did what no one else dared to do. Now it's time I do what everyone should." On Friday, before the sun had fully risen, Talia arrived at the restaurant. Holding the freshly printed shift schedule, still scented with ink, she stepped into the familiar kitchen, but this time as the official manager. No slogans were needed, no speeches. At the first staff meeting, she simply said, "We can't fix everything in a day, but if you see something wrong, say it. If you need help, speak up, and I will listen." The kitchen fell silent for a few seconds, then nods began to appear, slow but sincere. Malcolm stood quietly by the back door, not stepping in, only observing. He saw the atmosphere had changed, lighter, warmer, as if an invisible layer had been lifted that once kept everyone's heads down. The head chef smiled for the first time in months. Hot dishes were brought to the tables with a rare sense of pride. Fort Baxter, once a dark mark in the chain, was now beginning to emerge as a new model. One afternoon, as Malcolm was sitting alone reviewing receipts in the office, the dishwasher boy, Jaden, walked in, hesitating. "My mom used to work in Tulsa. That year, my brother got sick, and you gave her paid leave." Malcolm looked up, his gaze softening. "Ramsey, right?" Jaden nodded. "She always said you were different from everyone she'd ever worked for." Malcolm nodded slowly. "And now you're proving her right." That evening, after everyone had gone home, Malcolm stayed behind, seated alone with a simple bowl of corn chowder that Talia had made especially for him. Simple, quiet, yet to him, it was the taste of something right. 1 week later, Malcolm received an email from the CEO's office with a short subject line. "Request for meeting, urgent." But he was the one setting the terms. No boardroom, no ties, no press. The meeting took place at Fort Baxter on a Sunday afternoon, during the restaurant's scheduled deep cleaning. Malcolm sat at table 7, where everything had started. When the CEO walked in, tall, polished, but with wary eyes, he extended his hand. Malcolm simply nodded, not rushing to shake it. "We've read the article. Glenn's been let go, and the legal team is reviewing all policies." Malcolm replied shortly, "Good, but not enough." Then he laid out his demands, clear and direct. Back pay for employees whose hours were unfairly cut, an anonymous whistleblower system in every location, full health coverage for hourly workers, and updated policy handbooks to be distributed to every head chef within a month. The CEO hesitated. "That's quite a list." Malcolm looked up, his gaze unwavering. "I've been told my whole life that I ask for too much. I don't care about that anymore." After a pause, the handshake was accepted. This time, for real. Later that afternoon, Malcolm walked into the kitchen. Talia was wiping down the last counter. He placed a small envelope into her hand. Inside was a check for $2,000 and a slip of paper with just 5 words. "For the day you spoke up." Talia didn't say anything, only looked at him with quiet gratitude. In the warm kitchen light, without applause, they both knew. This was the true beginning. In today's workplaces, true strength no longer lies in ruling through fear, but in building trust and creating a shared voice between leadership and the people they lead. The story of Malcolm Graves is living proof that a founder may grow older and step behind the scenes, but the responsibility to uphold core values never retires. And Talia, a seemingly ordinary waitress, reminded us of something many organizations forget. Sometimes change does not come from the boardroom, but from a single person brave enough to write 6 words on a folded receipt. Wrongdoing does not persist simply because of bad actors, but because good people choose silence. Yet all it takes is one voice at the right moment to begin cracking the system from within. If you believe that courage and integrity are still the foundation of any organization, like this video to help spread that value. Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful and true stories each week. And leave a comment with the phrase, "Defend what's right," as a promise that you will always stand with those who choose to do the right thing, even in silence.